Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy here in our own studio this week. I'm John Mahoney, and it's great to have you here. On today's show, we're going to be looking at a preset that you can use to run a hybrid event. Now, hybrid events are something that probably over the past year have really become the predominant form of event-based production, where it involves an in-venue audience, somebody either a studio, in an office location, or in a traditional venue, with presenters that are both in venue and also coming in remotely, with additions of participants, outside viewers, basically, that are now coming in remotely as well. So this would be people that could be watching a stream on Zoom or something like that, but may still want to ask a question and get in. So a lot of different moving pieces in this. And I think, there'll be something in here that you could probably apply in some of your own productions. Let me jump in though, and I want to welcome everybody. If you would like to leave a comment or have any questions about what we're talking about, just put them in the comments below and we'll get to them here on the show. And as always, if you'd like to join us live on air, we have a link you can go to. It's also in the show notes. And somebody from the studio will get you on. So let's get started. Let me first welcome people. So we have America Newscape has come in. America, thank you for popping in here. Love to have you on the show. We have Wolfgang Bogler. Wolfgang, thank you. This hopefully you can find something in here that you can use yourselves. This is great to have you here. And we have JP. JP, as always, good to see you here. So thank you. So let's dive in. And let's really talk about first the framework that we want to use in this hybrid event that we're setting up. And so the way we're setting this up in this preset is that we're going to have two cameras that are in venue. So sort of a wide shot and a close shot. We're going to have three remote presenters. We're going to have a display in venue that we'll be able to use when any of those remote presenters are talking. So it's easy to sort of switch over and have that display going to the in-venue audience. And we're going to have an audience coming in via Zoom that's basically going to be mostly an audio interaction with them, but we'll be able to stream everything to them so they'll get to see the entire production. So that's basically the general framework. We're going to be using LiveToAir to bring in the remote guest, and we're going to have a green room for the guests that will be coming in. So it will give them, again, that whole experience that they would normally have in a pure traditional event, but the ability now to sort of interact with other presenters and do all that. So let's dive in here because there's a lot of different pieces. So let's start by looking at how we organize the preset here in vMix. So if I go through this, I split it up into sort of assets, green room, combo boxes, sort of all the multi-box shots, audio, and then the venue display. So let's just start with the incoming assets. So we really have five things. As I mentioned, we have the two in-venue cameras, and we have the three remote guests coming in from LiveToAir. So it's sort of very traditional camera shot types of things. In the green room, we have two things. So we have first the green room for the participants, which is a layered input. And we've sort of shown this before. I can touch on it, but that's something that we've sort of looked at before. And we're using one of the things that was introduced in vMix 25, which is an input that has the output in it. So this input is basically showing whatever is on the vMix output over here. And we use that. If you see here, we have the feed that's going back to the people in the green room. So this lets them, while they're in the green room, still hear what's going on in the main venue space. And that can be very useful. So the next thing we have are the combo shots. So we really have three combination shots that we're using here. We have a 3-box, which will have all the remote presenters. We have a one box plus sort of the in-venue host. And this will allow a remote participant and the in-venue host to directly interact sort of one-on-one. And then we also have a two box for the remote participants. This gives us a lot of flexibility. And in the way we set this up, we can control who goes into which one of these boxes. So it's fairly flexible for some of the things we want to do. Now, the next one here is the audio inputs. And when you deal with multiple destinations, audio becomes a lot more complicated. So we need to actually send one audio feedback to the LiveToAir guests, the remote presenters that we have in here. We need to send another feedback to the people that are on Zoom. And then we need another feed yet for the sort of the stream, or however we're going to record this event. There could even be a fourth one. We didn't put it in here. If you needed to do certain things inside the venue, which needed its own audio feed, where maybe you didn't want the presenter's audio in venue because it's a small group, but you still needed audio feeds for all the remote participants. So you get the sense, but we have this for the venue audio. We have the Zoom return audio. And we also have an operator headset. So we have a way in this where if the operator needed to talk to the remote Zoom audience, they could actually just do a push to talk and talk to them. So we'll go into that. But this is part of what we set up here. The final thing that we have set up is something for an in-venue display. Now, when you think about a hybrid event, the people that are in the venue are going to need to be able to see and hear the people that are interacting remotely. So if there's a remote presenter. So you need to put them up on a display. But some of the things, like the shots that you have where you have a multi-box with one remote guest and the in-studio, or so the in-venue host, you don't want to send that out to the venue display because they see the host there. So you have this sort of slightly delayed host shot coming in with the remote guest. So we have to handle that. So in how we set this up, when we do the switching, we can switch one thing that will go to the remote guest coming in, the remote viewers looking over Zoom, and another going into the in-venue display. So we have that set up. And this is, basically all the elements that we've put together here for this. So let's see, what else do we want to go? So when we think about how we have everything set up here, it really comes to now the mechanics for how all of these things work. So the first thing I want to touch on is let's talk about video routing and where we have this. So I'm just going to open up the settings over here. Let's see. Okay, we're going to look at outputs. So the way I have this set up is I have output for this. It can be anything that I want to ISO record. So I could just go and say this will be my standard output. Doesn't matter. I can set this up for what I want to record. The output 2 is the video that's going to be sent back to the folks coming in via Zoom. The output 3, which is input 18 here, this is going to be the video that's being displayed on the in-venue display. And output number 4 is the green room that we're setting up for the remote guests coming in through LiveToAir when they're in off-air mode. So we'll sort of go through this. The interesting one to call out here is that output 3, what's being displayed on the monitor. If I get out of here and we go down to 18, what you see here is that 18 as a input is another mix. So we're using the ability to add mixes as inputs. And that you do if you go down here and you click on this little icon here, you'll notice that you get something that says mix. You can add a mix, and then you can control that mix where you have for that input a preview and its own program out, and you can switch between what you see there. So this gives you a lot of flexibility. And we're going to use that when we control the in-venue monitor. So let's discuss this in-venue monitor now in a little bit more detail. What we are doing when we set up everything inside of the preset here is we are using things where we put elements inside of preview first. That lets us do things like if I want to reconfigure them, I can do that. So this would mean that I could put up a 2 box and choose which remote guests are in each of those boxes, things like that. But that also gives us the ability now to decide what we want to send to the second mix. So when we send anything, like set up anything for our multi-box shots, I can turn around and send something different if I want to my in-venue monitor. And that's exactly what we do when we're sending stuff like a camera feed. So if you look at this in-venue monitor, if I click any one of the camera feeds and then do a take, you'll see that this now is blank. But if I did somebody like a REM, you see that the REM now, because that's a remote guest, that now is inside my in-venue monitor. So when I do cut, you'll now see that the in-venue monitor is showing this guest up here. But if I actually, let me do this here. If I come back and say, I'm going to send, this will be now my preview over here, so you can see I have this. Let me actually put guest on air. Give me a second here. There we go. So I have the guest sitting here now. So if I go and I send this out, you'll notice that the in-venue monitor, which is the thing you're seeing here on the top right-hand side of the display, you'll see that that just took a 1 box. But what is being streamed to the people on Zoom remotely or recorded is this 2 box shot. And so this now means that I am controlling these as 2 separate mixes, but I'm using a single button to do that. And the way we do that is with what's basically called dynamic scripts. And I'll show you that right here. So we'll just take one example to go through how we do this. And just keep in mind, we'll put all of this up in our GitHub repository, so you'll have the entire preset from vMix, so you'll be able to play with this and work with it yourself. So if I come over here to shortcuts, and let's just look at exactly what we did for the host plus guest, which is the script that we were actually using here. So there's a few things, but what we're doing is we're coming and saying, I want you to send one preview input, which is input 8, which is this host plus guest multi-box that we have. So I want you to send that to our standard preview input. But I also, at the same time, I want you to send input 17, which I'll talk about in a second, to our mix 1. And so input 17 is a very simple little script that we have here. And it's just 2 standard API function calls. So input 17 is this input right here. And all we're doing with this is when I set who's in box 1, we have a whole set of buttons. I know there's a lot going on, so I just want to, if we take a shot of the Stream Deck here, you can see that I have multiple assignments for each one of the guest slots. So for slot 1, I can say which guest, remote 1, 2, or 3 do I want in that. For slot 2, 1, 2, or 3 for that. So you can see that's how I have this little setup right here to do that. So whenever I press one of these buttons, so let's make sure I have this. So you'll look at this in the corner here. When I set this to REM 1, it stays the same. When I set it to REM 2, it now changes to the guest in REM 2 and now changes to the guest in REM 3. So as I do this now, I can choose who goes in the shot over here. So you can see that that is changing, but I'm also changing who goes in the shot that I'm going to send to my monitor. So this is what we did, but it's subtle, but it's really important to understand that unlike a traditional live stream where you're just working with one audience in one location, sort of your audience is remote or your audience is all local, you need to handle this differently because you want the people in venue to see something different from the people that are at a remote viewing location like Zoom. So that I wanted to jump in. So since we talked a bit about this, let me go through what we have up here on the Stream Deck and give you a little bit of the operational sense, now that you understand some of the dynamics that we have at play here. So in this Zoom, the way we have everything set up is that I can pick any one of the 5 feeds. We said we have camera 1, camera 2, which is sort of a close-up, and my 3 rem guest. And then when I want to cut to that, I can just go and pick and I do the cut. And what you see down here are the 3 different multi-box shots I talked about. So we have the multi-box here, which is a remote guest plus the host. And as I showed you, all of this, I can pick whoever I want. Now the same happens with a 2-box. So if I come here and I have a 2-box, so actually let me bring the next guest on air. So we can go here and pick who do I want in this second box. And the reason I do this in preview is that I may want to take and put this fellow here in box 1 in box 2. So if I come here, I can come and say, now I'm going to set this person up in box 1. Now you see I have 2 images of this person, and we're going to set this person up in box 1. That's all happening in preview. And then when I'm ready, I can just cut, and that sort of will come up and display here. So doing it where I set people into preview allows me to dial in exactly what I want to see in the multi-box shot, and then sort of then take that as the live shot that we're streaming out to people. And the same thing here. So let me bring on the 3rd guest on air, and I'll talk a bit about that in a second. So now I may turn around and say, I want to put them here, and I want to put them there. So now I have everybody set up, and then when I'm ready, just go and take that. So it gives me a buffer for how I want to set things up before I go live with them. And so that's basically everything we're doing over here. The other thing that you'll notice, let me go to this shot here. And we'll take that shot. I have something to set the camera. So I told you I have 2 cameras in venue. So I could go and say, I actually want to go to my wide shot and use that. Or I want to go to my close-up shot. Now, the way we're doing this, these are all just little dynamic scripts. We're just making API calls to say, set these things into these layers. And this is stuff we've covered in the past. So I probably don't need to dive into it. Or if you want to go into it, I can do that in the post-show. But this gives you now the ability to control exactly what is going out on screen. And all of these things would work the same way. So if I came back, let me sort of switch around what I have here. And I go and I put this remote host in preview. This works exactly the same way. I can go and say, which one of these shots do I want? And which one of the guests do I want in there before I go live? So that has how all the multi-box things work here. The next thing I wanted to talk about a bit was the green room. We mentioned that we have this. So if you look here, let me bring everybody off air and I'll sort of show you how this green room works. So we'll just put this camera here, take that and set the green room. So just give me a second here. Okay, so here's how we have it set up. So when the guests first come in, they are directed to what we call our off-air return feed. So actually, if I can jump over to LiveToAir for a second, just we can do that. Down here, you can see this is the return audio and video, an indicator of what guests get when they are off-air. And this is the return video and audio that they'll receive when they're on air. So right now, I have these guests and they're all switched off-air. And what I can do is using macros in LiveToAir as well as the shortcuts in vMix, I can take and I can send guest on and off air. So I'm going to send guest 1 on air. And you can see just by, I pressed a button on my Stream Deck here, and that actually set this guest 1 on air. And I can do the same thing and pull them off. So that's what's sort of taking place on the LiveToAir side. But if we jump back to the vMix side here, you'll see that all these guests here are coming in. They see this in the green room. But when I put a guest on air, so I'm going to put guest 3 on air, I actually pull them out of the green room, and it gives an indicator here that they are currently on air. Their audio gets rerouted and everything else. So these people can still hear each other and hear whatever's coming in and watch whatever's coming in over the program. But this guest is pulled out. So if you're doing something where you want to present as one at a time, you could take and pull them sort of on air and off air. So I can pull this one off air and put the middle one on air. And now these 2 guests. So the green room is set up with a very simple mechanism. And the way we're doing this is we're using layers, and we're switching these layers dynamically. So this is a little more complicated. This is probably the most complicated scripting we're ever going to do in a vMix Basic show. But if I come here, let me go into my shortcuts. And you can see when I do this on-air script. So this is probably a pretty good example here. So what I'm doing in this is all of these functions here are turning around and changing what's directed in a layer. So the first 3 up here are basically taking my multi-boxes and saying anyone that's using that guest 2, switch them around to now put the real video of that guest 2 in there, and go back here, and let's take this last one. This last one is saying go to input 6, which is my green room, and now put that little blank slate in there so people know that that guest is on air. So we're using some API functions that are very standard shortcuts inside of vMix for changing what's set in layers, but we're using that when we do this. The other thing we do, and let me sort of scroll down here, this we don't really have to go into here. It's a little beyond what I want to cover in this show, but all we're doing is we're sending an HTTP request to LiveToAir to come back and say, switch that guest in this channel on air, or we can switch them off air. And so we're just sending little macro commands over to LiveToAir to do this. So now when I press the on air or off air button, I am changing the state in LiveToAir, and I'm changing where that video for that guest gets routed, either to a green room or to a multi-box shot. So it gives us now a lot of flexibility for how all of this stuff is set up with guests coming in. And I don't make it any more complicated for the operator. The operator now is simply saying, I bring the guest on or off air with a single button push, and everything inside of the preset now works the way you would expect. Okay, so I said, again, we're going to have all this stuff up on GitHub, so that should make it easier. So before I get to next, because I want to go into audio routing, which is sort of, I saved that for last because it's something that a lot of people sort of leave to the last minute, but it can be fairly complex. I'm going to show you exactly how we did the audio routing. So let's see, we have a few more here. So we have Biz Shortly, says he's back. Biz, glad you're here. Thank you for joining us. We have Automation for vMix saying, hi all, that's Gunnar from Sweden. So Gunnar, thank you for joining us here. And we have Bill Ashton Nilo. So Bill, thank you for joining. I definitely appreciate it. All right, so now let's go into exactly what we're doing with audio, because that's an important piece to everything we have set up here. And I'm going to go back into settings over here for this. And I'm going to jump in here to, let's see, my audio outputs first. So in the audio outputs, let's go through what we have here. So this is where we're sending our master output, which we're just going to do Dante, and we'll route that for in-venue or whatever we want to do. What we are doing, though, is everything down here, A to G, are audio buses inside of vMix. So we're really using two different audio buses here for what we want to do. We're using bus F and bus G. So bus G is our green room audio. And so anything that we assign to bus G is what the guests will be hearing when they are actually it's actually for when they're live. So it's the on-air audio. So my apologies. So that's the on-air audio. So it would be everything that they would need to hear outside of other LiveToAir guests, because LiveToAir will create that own mix. So we have to create one audio mix for the on-air remote guests, remote presenters. We have to create another audio mix for everybody that's coming in through Zoom. And the reason we do that is we give Zoom people the ability, and we'll show this next, the ability to sort of raise their hand and ask a question. And that's audio only, but it's something that we don't want that echo to be going back to them. So we need to create our own feed for that. And so those are the two that we have set up in vMix itself for our different outputs. So how we handle that. So if I come down here, so let's actually look at, let me see if I can go to the assets here, because this will be, so here you can see in the assets first, I have these three remote guests that are coming in that all have audio. And so if I right click down here, you can see that I am sending this audio to bus F, which is the feed we're sending back to Zoom. So this means that everybody in the Zoom universe will hear the remote presenters coming in through LiveToAir. We're also sending them out to the master audio, which means that whatever we record, anything that's going into sort of the whole venue, this is something they'd all be able to hear, all these guests. And so we have that for each of the LiveToAir guests that we have set up here. So that's the first audio route, and that's bus F. Now, bus F, let me sort of jump back for a second. Because we're running Zoom on the same system here as we are running our vMix session, what we needed to do was use something called a virtual audio cable. And so if you take a look, go to settings here. There we go. And I look at audio outputs. You'll see that this bus is being routed out of a virtual audio cable, VV audio cable. And we are using that as our input when vMix, when Zoom is asking us for a microphone, we're picking the other end of this audio cable, this virtual audio cable. That's our audio going in to Zoom. So this means that everything that hits this bus becomes the microphone that's we configure in Zoom. And we'll show that side as well. For bus G, here, we just enabled it. That's because in LiveToAir, we are actually pulling the NDI audio for that, which makes that much simpler. So the other thing besides let's look at all the audio inputs we have here. So now we have the venue audio, which is anything, the mics, if they had handheld mics or people in the in-venue audience to ask questions, all of that would be coming through here. We have the Zoom return, which means that if I want to let somebody that's in my Zoom audience ask a question, that's where that audio would come from. And then we also have an operator headset. And I mentioned that's audio that we will be able to route back to the Zoom audience. So if you need the operator to say, just wait in 5 minutes, the next speaker will be on, you can do all that stuff and interact with that audience without streaming that out, to what you're recording or any sort of live stream. So that gives you a way to interact with them. So if you look at where the venue audio goes to master. So that's sort of core, but it's now going to both F, so everybody in Zoom, and G, all of the remote LiveToAir guests when they're live on air. So that means that anything that takes place in the venue now is heard at both those remote, with both those remote audiences. The Zoom return, if we go over here, that is only sent back to the remote LiveToAir. It's not looped back to Zoom. And that also goes to master. So everybody in venue and anybody in, if you had another remote stream or in the recording, will hear that Zoom guest asking a question, but they won't loop back to themselves, so they won't get that echo. And the last thing we have over here is an operator headset. Now, I have this set up, so you see this is not going to master. It is simply going to Zoom. And the way I handle this, so is I have a button here, which is a Zoom push to talk. And so let's see if we can configure this to show the Stream Deck here as well. So if I hit the Zoom push to talk, you'll notice that the audio gets turned on here. And so anything that I talk into this headset mic will be going out. And then when I take that off, that will be going away. So now this makes it very easy for me to quickly do a push, and I can talk to the remote Zoom audience the same way I could talk to an in-venue audience. The other thing you'll notice is that over here, I have Zoom audio. So if I want, and again, this is good, this is the Zoom return, I can turn around and you notice that that audio is off. If I want to allow audio coming in from Zoom, I can just press this, it turns it on, and now you'll see that the audio here is also on. And again, these are just simple shortcuts that we're doing to do all these things. So I'm mapping a shortcut to turn audio on off for a given input. And that's all that's going on here. And then when I turn that off, that goes away. So now you get a sense of some of the audio routing that is involved in working with these different positioned audiences that we need to accommodate in our production. The LiveToAir remotes, the Zoom remotes, and everybody in venue or for the recording. So let me do, since we're here, let me sort of show, I'm going to put this down here. Let me show you the Zoom interface here. And so, let's see, do we have that up yet? No, so, okay. So what I have here now is this is what somebody coming in from Zoom would see. And in here, I open up, so sort of on the side over here, I opened up a list of all the participants. And the first thing I can do is I can go and say, I want to mute everybody. And so anybody that joins the show when I start this way will all come in muted. And because I have the control in the Stream Deck to sort of mute the channel in general, I have a lot of control here. The other thing is I don't let people unmute themselves unless I invite them to. So if somebody had a question, so let's sort of take a look. So you can see here, there's a hand raise. And that hand raise is done down here in the reactions. It's one of the things you have. Now, since I'm hosting this, I can't raise my own hand here. But this is something where you see you can raise your hand, agree, disagree, other things. You get to see those reactions over here in the panel on the side. So if you're looking at what's going on with your Zoom audience, you can see that somebody raised their hand. So I can go over and I can say, I'd like you to unmute. So I can send them an ask to unmute. And you can see the guest now unmuted. I can go over and turn on the Zoom audio. That guest can now ask a question. And I could have the host interacting with this one guest back and forth that they needed clarification. And then when that interaction is over, I can simply go and say, lower this person's hand. And I can just go back and mute the guest again. And this gives me an easy way to do general interactions with the audience. The other thing you have is you can do things like chat and other things. So if I needed to, if I wanted to let guests sort of chat in questions and have somebody read them off, you could do all of those types of things as well. But this is a very simple sort of Zoom interface. So we're not doing anything special. But the way we have this set up, if I'm looking at the microphone, that's the other end of the virtual audio cable. And my speaker is a second virtual audio cable, which goes back. And that's the audio that's coming in as my Zoom return. So this virtual audio cable's bidirectional. And that's how I have everything set up here. So again, very, very straightforward mechanisms for interacting with this remote audience. But it's definitely something that if you want to do this, this is a great start point for you. You could do a lot more scripting. You can do a lot more, Zoom controls and other things that is really not the point of this. But this just gives you a sense. It could be Zooms. This could be Teams. It could be, Google Meets. Anything that you'd want to use over here, you could use as a remote for a remote audience. And then whatever interactive tools, you can leverage them here and do things with them inside of that product itself. So hopefully that gives you a sense of some of the things that we can do here around working with sort of that second piece of the remote audience. So let's see. So I want to jump back. I think we have a few more people that have popped on. So we have, hopefully I'm saying this, Paris TV. Hello from Argentina. Paris, thank you very much for joining us here. And we also have Joe DeMax. This is Joe from Nottingham, more famously known as Joe from Central Control. So if you don't know Joe DeMax, he has an incredibly powerful tool for doing a lot of automation. And so some of the things that we showed here, if I rolled that into Central Control, it would have made life a lot easier. But we will be doing a show on Central Control in the future. But Joe, thank you for joining us here. Okay, so I think that wraps up everything that I wanted to cover directly during the show. Please keep keep any questions you want. We'll jump into the post-show hangout, and I'm glad to talk about anything else there. I also know that last week I didn't get to answer all the questions. We were having a little trouble communicating internally with sort of the new fly pack style setup that we had for doing the show. So I didn't get all the questions in. So if you were part of our show last week and you had any other questions from last week where it was sort of then ask me anything about streaming, well, we'll bring that into the post show here. So I know we have a few more people. So why don't we jump into the post show and then we'll get to the remaining comments over here. See you in a few. All right, welcome to the post-show hangout. So let's jump back. There is, clearly Joe DeMax has a bit of a fan club here, which is always good. He's well deserved. So we have Kevin Michael Reed saying he needs no introduction, that he's famous. So absolutely. So, and we also have John Lind. He's also hiding here in the back. So John, thank you for joining us. And so I'm hopefully saying this correctly. Honatas Olivieri. So saying hello from Brazil. So Jonatas, thank you for joining us here. So while you pull any questions together, I wanted to talk a little bit about this episode, some of the specific things behind how we set this episode up. We knew this was a topic that a lot of people were asking about, and this could easily turn into something way more complex, which we were actually trying to avoid. We wanted to do something that was still pretty accessible and people that are comfortable with sort of a lot of the core vMix functionality could take and apply without jumping into heavy duty scripting. As I mentioned, we are using, start script dynamic, I think is the shortcut. And we have like multiple shortcut commands. The only thing that was complex in there was what we had to set commands back to LiveToAir to do things. So that was just sort of an example. You don't need to use that. But everything else we have set up is basically vMix shortcuts in their API.function format. So you can use this as a template and should be able to do pretty much anything you'd want for your own environment. So that was a big piece of this. So how we set this up was really around that. And we needed to have lots of moving parts because the reality of a virtual or sort of a hybrid production is that you have, remote guests, you have sort of remote audience, you have remote presenters, you have a local audience and local presenters. So we needed to have something which represented that. So hopefully I was able to sort of communicate all the moving parts here without making it overly complex or confusing. So let's see. So what else do we have? So we have America Newscape is saying lots of homework for me. Well, we'll put all this up, and hopefully, this you'll be able to sort of leverage what we upload into GitHub and do something with it that works more specifically for you. So we have JP is asking, how would you set this up in a studio environment so presenters can hear the Zoom speaker and talk back to them? So JP, the way we have this set up is that everybody, so let's talk a little bit about the Zoom audio. In standard Zoom, there's only one audio in and one audio out in Zoom. So you have the audio from all the remote guests, and that has one audio out. And then you have the audio that all the guests will hear, but that's a mixed mic. So you're not taking any of that remote guest audio. You're just sending all the studio audio or the remote guest audio, and you're handling, or the remote presenter audio, and you're sending that back to Zoom. And the way we did that is, let me see if we can switch back to the screen here. The way we have this set up is I have two buses that we're using. So bus F is one of the audio buses in vMix, and bus G, which is another one. Bus F, we are routing to a virtual audio cable, and we're using that inside of Zoom as our microphone in. We're using the reverse direction of that virtual audio cable as the speaker out from Zoom, and that is going in to this input here, which is our Zoom return. So anytime that I want the audio from Zoom to come in, I can just take and turn on the Zoom audio, which you sort of see over here. This is the audio coming in from Zoom, and then I can mute it when I want to mute it. But that's how the audio goes back from Zoom. This audio from Zoom is routed to the, let's see, do I have, go to the assets over here. That audio is routed to bus G. So sort of look here. So bus G is the return audio that's going back to the LiveToAir remote presenters. So actually, let me go back to this. So if I go over here and look at where I'm routing the Zoom return audio, you can see that audio is now going to bus G. So that's how the two sides hear each other. When somebody from the Zoom side is talking, that's coming back, that's coming, they're getting that audio coming back through the Zoom return, and that Zoom return gets routed to bus G, which is for my LiveToAir guest. And then the Zoom participants are hearing the audio that's coming from, over here. So this bus F, that's coming from the virtual audio cable. And that's, so anything that I route to bus F is being heard by that. So if I go over to the green room over here, go over to assets over here, all of these guests are all being routed out to bus F. So they are hearing all the guests from the LiveToAir side. So that's how the connection is happening. And we're just using virtual audio cable to do that. So really great utility. You can basically make a contribution to them. You can buy, again, for like name your own price, you can buy or a very small amount, you can buy a 4-pack. Definitely, if you're in the production space, having those will save your bacon so many times over. They're great to have anytime you need to get two devices on the same system talking cleanly with each other. So let me jump back here. So hopefully that gives you that, that sense, JP, for how that connection would be made. So we also have Biz shortly is asking. So he does have a question from last week. So Biz, I think you may have been one of the ones that we missed. So I apologize for that. He says, how can you keep the shortcuts mapped to a button when you rearrange the buttons on the Stream Deck? You can't. So that's it is one of those. It's one of those things that can be really frustrating. If you're setting this up and you sort of remap where the layout is, they don't travel with it, and that's just unfortunate. But the Stream Deck does so much for you, though, that it's one of those things that I just sort of deal with as a as sort of the one downside of an otherwise really fantastic solution. But sorry, I don't have a better answer there. So we have John is saying Joe is famous. Yes, I mean, central control and what they're doing, especially with 3.0, really exciting stuff there. I have to spend a lot more time with the new 3.0 release, but I'm pretty excited by where this is going, and what you get. I mean, one of the things that I have not tried yet that I'm really excited about in the new central control is the teleprompter, which lets you do triggering. So this is something you sort of saw in the TriCaster, had a teleprompter where you could add triggers for different things for macros inside of the TriCaster as the teleprompter scrolled. I think Joe just did this for the rest of us, sort of thing, and I think that's fantastic. So really looking forward to it. And John, I'm glad you got to hang out with Joe. He's definitely a cool guy to talk to in person, as well as producing an incredibly fun and exciting product. So let's see. So Joe DeMax is actually asking, are we using Vincent Burrell's VB audio cable? Yes. I mean, everything on. I mean, if you go to I think it's VB Audio. I have to remember the website, and if somebody could post it, I just forget offhand. But they have some incredibly powerful audio tools, for like Potato, Banana, which are both audio sort of mixers, recorders, routers, and the VB audio cables are phenomenal. So I would support them. I would support them making some sort of donation to them. I know what it takes to develop software. And, I would love to see Vincent be able to get some reward for the labor he must put into keeping all these products running. So let's see. So JP is asking, if the audio is running through in-studio monitors, will it be picked up on presenters' microphones? How to get around that? So there are a couple of ways to do that. So one of them would be to, you can actually, when audio is coming back above a certain level, you could have it roll down the sensitivity of the mic. So there are different ways to do that. So if you have one audio source, that's called ducking, but it's sort of ducking in reverse, where as opposed to ducking audio levels, I'm ducking the audio incoming level. So there are ways to do that. You can sort of fake it in vMix, but it is still something that, if you have an in-house engineer, that's really something that would probably be most important for them to sort of ride levels. And that's doing these all by yourself requires a lot more automation and gives you less flexibility. So one way you could do this is simply turn around and say, when I have one of the remote guests speaking, I'm going to press a button which will just lower the levels on all of my in-house mics. So by and large, it will stop some of that pickup from happening. So that's one thing. You could just do mutes for that. If you had an audio engineer, they could ride levels and make sure that, if something seemed to get picked up, they would pull that down, so it wouldn't be that obvious. The other thing to do is to if you're doing that, you can use sort of noise gates where you say anything below a certain level, I just shut the mic off. And what that will do is if you're using mics which are fairly localized, like, a lav mic where it isn't going to necessarily be picking up things from across the room, if you could put a noise gate on that, that could help as well. So different possible ways to do that. But, this is where having a true A1 position where somebody's managing that can make a lot of difference. And the other thing is that maybe you don't need to have that mics based on the size of the venue. You might not need to have mics on the presenters there. And that could be you just have a mic for the audience asking questions. And, the mic on the presenter could just be an ambient mic for things that I want to do so remotes hear them. So different ways. I mean, you could really figure it out. So when I meant mics, I meant you don't have to have the mic from the in-venue presenter going over loudspeakers or anything like that. So there may be some ways to prevent that sort of stuff. So different things that you could do to try to keep the audio chaos under control, but it's always an issue. Feedback in event-based venues is always something you're going to have to play with. And there are plugins, there are other things, but definitely that's a very good question because it is important. All right, so let's see. So let's see, what else do we have here? What's our next question here? So Aziz is saying, hi, John. I do the same thing at work. The challenge is to live edit at the same time, take care of the Zoom audience. Yeah, I mean, so what we did in this was really, we used the same general feed for the live audience, sort of if we're recording it or streaming it out over YouTube or Facebook or a private CDN. And, what we send out to Zoom or send back to everybody, remote and LiveToAir. You don't necessarily have to do that. I mean, you could go and create different feeds for these different remote destinations. It becomes an issue of how much can you automate. So like some of the things we did is when I show a camera for one of the in-venue things, I take that camera off the monitor because you don't want to have that slight visual delay between what I see on a monitor in the venue and the actual live venue view. So, this is really not like an iMac setting. It's more a way to let remote guests talk to your in-venue audience. So we do things like that, but there may be other things you're going to want to do. You may want to send timers or other stuff back to your remote participants in something like LiveToAir, or you may need to send other types of things to your Zoom audience. Maybe you have things that, they'll have breaks and you want to send them one thing where you won't need to do the same thing to a live stream or to the in-venue folks. So it's tricky. You could do this through something like having OBS as an aggregation point for creating different mixes for different groups. So to take a general feed and customize it, things like that. You can use the different outputs and the different mix inputs inside of vMix where you could have your primary mix, and we use mix 2 for the in-venue display, but you could use a mix 3 and mix 4 and create, things that you switch. And some of that could be done through automation using a Stream Deck. So when I want to show this to this location, I can press one button and it decides what goes on to each one of my mixes and switches those out. And that's sort of what we did with the display, the in-venue display. But you could apply that to all of the different mixes that you have for each of the different remote destinations. Okay, let's see. So he's saying, Aziz is saying he's putting putting people on full screen, unmuting and things like that. Yeah, I mean, all of those things are tricky. And again, it really comes down to, one of the things we did so let me let me switch back, see if we can pull this up. I want to show the thing with the remote host and also show what we have going out to the in-studio display, because this is pretty close to, see if I can do that here. So if you look down here, right now, this is what we have sort of with the remote, with the in-studio host and a remote host, a remote speaker talking with each other. But now if I turn around and say, I want to take this live, you'll see that when I take this live, we are actually sort of what we're showing in the in-studio monitor. So let me sort of go back here and we'll do this again. So take this. So now, oh, sorry, I did that wrong way. So this isn't, I guess this isn't, we got the wrong thing we're taking up here. Oh, there we go. Okay. I thought something was going on. So here, so if I sort of flip back here, so I have, this is the in-venue talent that you're seeing sort of sitting over here. And I have over here is the remote guest. And so say I set them and say, okay, I want to put that person on. You see that there. So if I switch this back there and say, okay, here is what's coming out now. I can do that. Then I can go and you'll see that the remote audience is seeing the guest plus the remote guest plus the in-venue. The people in the venue are simply seeing the one remote guest. And we do it. So when I change things around, I can, anything else that I sort of put here, say, let me just do like camera B here and switch, and I switch that. Oh, these people are not on air. So let me just do that. I guess oh, okay. I probably, oh, and let me do this. So now when I have this, oh, sorry about that. I am not doing very well today. So now I have cam A, and I'm going to cut to that. And so everybody's on air. So, okay, not sure what's going on, but this would actually normally just switch over to the people that I have. So you would see, oh, because this is the camera. Nope, this is my brain isn't always working. So now when I'm showing this in venue, I don't want to show that on the camera. So I just show sort of a blank screen. But then if I come here and I set this up and I say, now I'm going to show this with this guest. And when I take that, you can see that now I'm just switching and I have this over here and the other guest over here. So I probably have screwed stuff up switching around here and going in, but this should give you an idea of exactly what we have going on here. So hopefully, I'm sorry if that was a little bit confusing there. I just probably was playing around a bit as I was going through talking about stuff. So screw that. But that should give you an idea that when you switch, you can do it on a single button push and just route different things there. So sorry, that was a very poor demonstration of that. So let's see. So we have John Lind is saying he finds banana and potato to be great, but you do have to tweak the default settings a bit. Yeah, I mean, I love what they do, but you really have to be all in. It's not like a utility that runs on the side, it sort of sits in the middle of things and really can manage audio for you on your system. But both of them are really great. If you haven't checked them out, definitely do that. So the other thing that John is saying, which is really good, is he's saying that if you give your talent in-ear monitors, which is sort of what we use here, you can avoid some of the issues with speaker bleed and other things like that. So it's, but I think, what we're pointing out is that audio is always the bear. It's very difficult to get right, have sound good, no feedback, and make sure everybody needs to hear what they need to hear. So that's if you are looking at putting these together, I would definitely spend time making this work with as close to the environment you're going to be working with as possible. So if you're going to have things with speakers, one key thing is put speakers in front of everybody that's on, in the venue, on stage in the venue. So you can get a lot sort of rear rejection so that you're not going to pick up as much of the sound as being directed out, as opposed to putting it behind them where, there's a greater likelihood that the mics could pick things up. And using, gates, noise gates, and, labs and things with tighter pickup patterns. Things like those Countrymen and other things, they can have a very, very tight pickup. They're right close. And anything that's going on outside, they tend not to pick up. That's why those are also very, very popular for presenters, because they do handle any sort of ambient audio very, very well. And you really just pick up directionally from the speaker. So that's another thing to consider. So Biz Shortly is saying, I know with audio inputs, you can change the matrix and channel mixer. But yesterday he was trying to do that with a bus to send bus G, for example, to left channel and bus B to the right channel. He says, but I did not see matrix and channel options in the bus setting. Do you have a genius hack for that? So let me try to remember all the stuff. So, oh no, the matrix would be over here. So yeah, so in this, it isn't inside the bus. I believe it's inside each of the audio sources. So if I were to come here, this is where you'd have the channel matrix. It would be directly in the audio source. So this would let me say how I want it when I routed it to a bus, which channel on the bus I'd want it to go on to. So if you were trying to do something on G and you only wanted it to go to sort of the right or the left, I'm trying to remember what exactly you said. So you're not doing this inside of the bus itself. The bus is just, it takes a stereo input and, whatever's coming in and sends that out. So it's actually in each individual source and how you route it to that bus. So this would let you sort of, pick, I only want to send it to the right in the bus, things like that. So it gives you but that's the only way to do that as far as I know. Now, there are shortcuts for doing all this stuff. So you could use shortcuts to do the matrix routing. And that's something that could be interesting for doing, is where if you needed to do things dynamically, you could just change the matrix right away. So hopefully that helps a bit. It's not a genius hack, but it's sort of, there are ways to work around what you're trying to do, where you can decide how to place it inside the bus itself. You cannot route the bus to other buses directly, but you can route it out to an audio source. And so this would be an example of VB audio cable. So you could do that and send it to another bus, or send it to as an input, and then use that input as, something you could channel matrix route into another bus. So maybe some hacky ways to do that. That will add some latency. So I don't know, how critical that would be for your use case, but it may be small enough that it's not something that you'd necessarily notice. So Aziz is saying he wished there was a way to use vMix with two operators, and making the sort of underscoring the point that, not with the web interface. And I agree. The other piece to this, though, is, with shortcuts, you do have some capabilities for doing that. The other thing is, you can use vMix systems together. So you could have one vMix system worry about one part of the production and another worry about something totally different. So you could have one vMix, worrying about everything that's going to your live stream, and another vMix that's handling everything going to your sort of remote audience or remote presenters. So things like that. So you could do it, using multiple systems as well. So, and, at the price point that vMix is at, it's sort of in that anywhere from sort of $800 to $1,500. If you have a good enough business justification, that's certainly something that, you could consider for different types of use cases. But getting the workflow right with any production layout is tough. And we use vMix lots of different ways, even though we're switching on the TriCaster. So beyond what I'm doing here, all of our comments are coming up through vMix as a pre-multiplied output that goes into a downstream key in TriCaster. And we can just control what we're sending out, that pre-multiplied output in vMix. And that's how we do the comments you see here. So those are actually originating in vMix but coming through the TriCaster. So there are ways to work sort of over multiple systems in a single production for some of these things. So yeah, so Aziz is basically trying to solve the issue of there's too much for a single operator to do in some productions, and that's definitely the case here. I understand that fully. So let's see. So Biz Shortly came back and said, yeah, he was trying to do a talkback type thing, and with the press of a button, change the main audio output, move it to the left while I talked to the host in the right. So something like that. That's kind of a push to talk. The other thing is that could be a good case for audio ducking. So if you wanted to set this up with a Stream Deck, what you could do is when you push the audio level down, what you could do is you could drop the audio of the main level that is coming into your Talent headset. So if you have the Talent, you have your on-air Talent with their own dedicated bus that has an output, you could actually drop the level of that, and I'm trying to think through this as you say it, but yeah, probably the best way would be to take the audio as a single output that your operator hears, and have that as one feed, and just drop the level of that, sort of using an input tool for the audio level, and then tap in with a push to talk on top of that stays up at a higher level. So that could be something that you would do. And if you have multiple inputs because you're using automation, you could drop them all down. And then when you release the Stream Deck button, you could raise them all up again. So you can do things like that where it's more ducking as opposed to sending one ear or the other, which, just another way to do it to make it easier for the on-screen talent to hear an IFB type discussion. So let's see. So we have Utopia. Utopia, thank you. I appreciate you joining us here. He says, wondering whether you're generally in favor of routing audio out of vMix to physical gear for processing, or whether you prefer doing it all in the box. That's a tough one. And I don't say I have sort of one particular approach I would favor. I think what you get doing it all in the box is basically more automation control. But if you have an external mixer that has some level of automation control, you can do things with that. And having the external mixer can make it a lot easier, where you're simply like in the venue, you're taking in one audio feed from multiple mics, multiple speakers, all of that. So all your in-venue sources could be done through a board that goes in as a single input into vMix, or multiple inputs, so you could turn around and say on that audio board, if I want to use that because I want to stream, I want the audio stream that I'm sending out to all be controlled by the mixer. You could set up a mixer and use different submixers and have those go out and fed in. The advantage to an external is that if you have an A1, sort of an operator, an audio operator that's doing this, they can ride levels and can be much smarter about balancing the sound that everybody's hearing than you could get from straight automation. So it really is, what's your workflow like? How many people will you have on your crew? How comfortable is your A1 with sort of actually writing things in a live environment and dealing with that versus just sort of setting up the audio and sitting back? So a lot of different things go into it. we here are using an external mixer and Dante. And so everything that we want, we're routing via Dante into the TriCaster. But basically, the TriCaster audio is coming in as a single mix. And anything that we take out of the TriCaster, like things like the DDRs and music or anything that we play back, all of that is not being routed directly to the main output. That's being routed to the mixer, and the mixer handles the entire mix. And there's only one mix coming back from that mixer into the TriCaster that's going out the main output. So different ways to do this, but it really depends on your workflow. And so Latopia is saying, yes, delay is an issue, and that's you are dealing with both. So you have issues with delay to a board, but if your board is analog or even Dante, I mean, Dante is really, you're talking less than probably about like a third of a frame in most cases of latency when you're using Dante. So it's not something you'd necessarily notice. So a couple of hops, you still be within a frame of processing audio externally with something like Dante. Analog is pretty much real time, but it is the transition from analog to digital which adds the latency. So whatever your analog to digital converter you're using, and the USB transit time, you'd have to calculate that in for any type of delay. But yeah, it isn't. All of these things are trade-offs. And frankly, we had to put in a massive system here because of the types of things that we do for productions where I'm running vMix, I'm running LiveToAir, I'm running, like we have Zoom running in the background here. We have the comments coming in. So all of these things together. So we just had to put a really big system together for this. But the other thing is with things like Dante, with NDI, you can do things that span multiple systems. So sometimes it can be cheaper and more efficient to have multiple lower, I'm not saying low end, but lower end systems as opposed to turn around and saying, yeah, I'm putting in, 18 core, Xeons or, i7s or i9s for the 18 cores. So, you could turn around and say, no, I'm splitting it up and I'm going to have two sort of, AMD systems or, that are 8 cores each, which are relatively inexpensive, but relatively powerful. So different ways to think about it. So let's see. Aziz is saying he also uses virtual cables for Zoom or RevX while using vMix, and he doesn't see any real delay. Yeah, I agree. On the single system, virtual audio cable is basically the delay is transparent. You don't really see anything for that, and I think definitely great things to have. So let's see. John Lind is saying, particularly during sports events where we have commentators, referee mics, spectator mics, game mics, all sources are cared for before the audio is sent to vMix. And I think to John's real point there, having an A1, having somebody where you're sitting there going, I'm not worrying about this when I'm switching. I'm simply saying, I know that I'm getting the right audio I need at the right levels with the right mixes coming into vMix. And then I'm just really worried about the switches that I need to do. That can make it a lot easier for people. And again, if the automation, the automation could do a lot for turning things on and off, adjusting things, but it can't react necessarily. Those you need sort of plugins, and that adds more latency, and they're not really designed for that sort of live real-time type of finesse control where you have things that are ducking mics because other mics are talking and doing all that stuff. There are plugins for all that, but I would just think the latency and processing on those would be noticeable if you were using it in a production, that is otherwise coming, live without any delay. So Aziz is saying, is there any way to integrate Zoom chat into vMix, like YouTube or Facebook dynamic interface? As far as I know, there isn't. I'd have to look if there's API calls that you can make inside of uh, Zoom for that. But as far as I know, that's sort of on the side. So you'd have to do something which would cut it out and sort of put that there. But that's the only way that I would know how to do it. But there's a lot of people that are using Zoom a lot of different ways. So there may be something there that you could do for that. But that's the only way that I know. So unfortunately, isn't something that would be sort of simple in a vMix social type of environment where I could put the comments up directly. The other thing though is you can always do cut and paste, and so if you had an operator just managing the Zoom stuff, they could cut things out of the comments and just paste them into something that could be used for a lower third to put that up. So maybe possible to do something there, maybe even possible to automate some of that. So don't know enough to give you a solid answer one way or the other though. So let's see. So John is saying basically giving me just 3 sources to handle in vMix: commentators, game, and ambient. Yeah, I think that's exactly the point. You don't have to worry about it as the vMix TD. You're just simply saying, I know what I have and I call it up and I know it's right levels, right content. So yeah, totally agree, John. So JP is saying, what about lowering vMix resource requirement? Is there a setting in vMix? I think lower GPU. Ultimately, there isn't a good way to lower things other than like drop resolution or things like that. So you could turn around and say, if I'm doing a 1080p production, I can do that at 720, or I can take inputs coming in at 720 as opposed to having them, be all 1080. That can lower the demand, but it isn't really a setting per se because the system demands what it demands. Ultimately, some of that can be done on the GPU. So video transformation, scaling, sizing, encodes and decodes, all of those things can be done on GPU, which can free up resources on the CPU. But vMix will pretty much do that automatically. So it will take advantage of the hardware that you have. So anything you do to sort of dial down the number of compute cycles available to vMix will just impact negatively the quality of what comes out. So let's see. So Joe DeMax is saying that Liminal does not have a solution for sending the chat out. I do not know. So there may be, and that they're one of the folks that I was thinking of. And Zoom also has sort of their own control mechanism. So I do not know though whether they do or they don't. But that's something that people could definitely check out. And JP's other thing is to just use NDI and sort of crop it and put it on the side. That's also very possible using screen capture. So I mean, the fact that I actually was displaying that out to everybody here means that I could have just cropped that and put that off to the side. So if I wanted to sort of go and look at the Zoom chat, you could do something where you shrunk and put it on the side. So there are simple ways to do it as well if you don't need to do a solid integration into a sort of chat flow with multiple sources chatting all together and interacting that way. So JP, I don't believe there is a setting that lowers the graphics card requirement. Now, if I remember correctly, vMix has something, and if I'm wrong, please somebody jump in and correct me here. vMix has something where you could do isolation around different inputs, which raised some of the compute requirements, but it meant that if something crashed, vMix would sort of try to stay up and just recover the one part that crashed, and it sort of provided isolation. So it was really a robustness feature, but that took more GPU and CPU. So I don't believe, and if there is a way, I apologize that I'm not familiar with it, but I don't believe there's a way you can lower the graphics card requirement. It's gonna use the resources it's gonna need, and that's really just in terms of video processing in general. Anything that lowers compute is going to lower quality. So that's why I suggested sort of lowering resolution, where you're not moving as much data and the data sets you're having processed are going to be smaller data sets. So that's, and to be honest, for certain things like, remote guests, if I had remote guests coming in with a high quality SD resolution signal and you have them in multiple boxes, stuff like that is probably, people won't notice the difference. So if you're really tight on resources, there are ways that you could make up for that. And, hopefully, some of those things could help on the compute side. So let's see. Yeah, so Joe the Max was mentioned. I was thinking of the FEIM, for NDI inputs. So sorry if I just sort of knew of it generally. So so you can have one thing crash and keep vMix running. So that was what I was talking about. So it isn't even sort of the whole input. It's just for NDI inputs there. So Kevin Michael Reed is saying there's a low power mode in GPU for encoding, but he hasn't seen any difference when using it. And he's saying it's meant to get around the 3 encodes of NVIDIA or RTX cards. Yeah, I think encoding in compute art. So this is something that isn't always clear. There's something called CUDA. So when you use NVIDIA cards, CUDA is one thing, and then the NVENC, which is the encode and decode, is another thing. CUDA is really a video transformation line, not even video, just sort of big bit sets. It allows you to do all different types of scaling, transformation, other things with them. So it works with images, video, other things. So there's a whole language for that. And so things that resize video, and like everything you've seen, with vMix, when you put things in like layers and you size things to different position them, all that stuff in the compositing, that's probably being done with CUDA and driving that off the GPU. NVENC and NVDEC are two distinct things. NVENC is where you encode video, and there is a specific chip on the NVIDIA graphics cards that will do encoding. Encoding is needed for anything that you transform the fundamental nature of the video. So that means if I'm going from something that's just a full res source to saying this is H.264 and it has this many keyframes and this many, predicted frames and this many iframes, all, sort of the whole assembly thing, that's something that you do with an encoder. And so the standard GPUs that come, so the RTX and the regular GTX, all of those cards allow you to do 3 encodes simultaneously on that chip. The decoding piece, so that's things that you have remote video coming in from a source. So like if you're using vMix Core, using LiveToAir with WebRTC, the thing that does that sort of decode to display, those are unlimited on any of the cards. So, and that can be done now in hardware. So when you get a video source coming in, you can decode it in hardware instead of software. So doing more on the GPU is going to free up resources on the CPU. Doing the low power encode, I don't know particularly what that would or wouldn't do. It may turn around and mean that you can't do higher end encodes on your GPU and still get good quality. So it could be lowering some of the processing requirements on there. But you don't get around the limit of 3 on your standard RTX or GTX cards. It's only sort of the Quadro or the RTX A line, which is their new replacement for Quadro. Those are the only ones which free up, officially. There are patches and other stuff, but those are the only ones that officially free up the encodes to have as many encodes as the cards can support. So sorry if this is sort of going off in a lot of different directions, but this whole thing with getting enough power, it really is important, because I know a lot of people are doing multiple things on single systems. So these types of things are important to consider. So sort of ways to optimize resources on a system do matter, and definitely something that would probably be a good discussion for us to have at some point. So Uh, so Joe DeMax, Joe will know these things. So he's the actual guy with his hands in the code. So he says vMix scale render stuff. He's 90% sure is the D3, D9, but you can pin your D3D texture memory to the CUDA buffer for the sake of NVing. So yeah, this is just there for the people who are more technical than me in the audience, which is probably a fair number of you. This is sort of another level down for what's going on in there. But so Joe, thank you. So JP is saying thanks so much for the show. So many hours must have gone into pre-production. So he's grateful. I'm grateful to everybody that tunes in for the show. So it's a lot of fun doing this, and I am always open to topics. So please just reach out to me. You can go to John at streamingalchemy.tv and just send me any thoughts, ideas. Post them in Facebook comments. Post them in YouTube comments. We try to keep up with those. I know I'm falling a bit behind because we've been doing a lot recently, but I definitely do keep up with reading all the comments. So anything we can do that you guys would be interested in, just let us know. Something definitely, we're always looking for new topics to do. So, Joe was saying he's getting way bogged down with technicalities now. So yeah, I apologize. I mean, I try to be as technically accurate as I can, but yeah, I'm sure there are certain elements in here that I am not getting right at a deeper level. So I'm always happy to be corrected and to learn from the true experts. So thank you, Joe. So JP is asking your thoughts on running this on a laptop when at an outside location. Couple of things with running on a laptop. So the first thing is laptops will definitely be less performant than a desktop. So your bang for the buck is going to be, if you spend $1,000 for a desktop versus $1,000 for a laptop, the desktop will be considerably more powerful dollar for dollar than the laptop would be. That being said, if you get a laptop and you want to use it, the advantages are numerous in a remote production. We used the laptop for last week's show, running vMix. Get a laptop that isn't an ultra thin laptop. You can look at these laptops and get phenomenal specs on them. But the issue you have, and it's an issue that affects all the computing devices, is thermal performance. How, when a device gets hot, it looks for ways to cool itself down. And one of the things it does is something called thermal throttling. So it can happen to your GPU and it can happen to your CPU. So as you run the CPU at a higher clock frequency, which is really the compute power metric that you could use, when you run it at a higher clock cycle, it generates more heat. The system is measuring the temperature inside the box because the components could die. I mean, you could kill a component if it gets too hot. So the CPU is going to be looking at the temperature around its own internal thermal temperature and say, I'm getting too hot. So it can dynamically say, I'm going to run at a slower clock. So it can take something that's running at 4.1 gigahertz and say, now I'm going to jump down to 3.5 or to 2.8 or something like that. So significantly slow itself down. And that can also happen with your GPU. And what this means is that things that looked good in the first 15 minutes of your show, as you're asking more and more of your computer, it heats up more and more. It can throttle down, which means it's now struggling to do everything. So it is a real concern. So if you're going to use a laptop, get the thicker laptops, get ones with really good cooling. Use a cooling tray under it to try to draw as much heat out of it. Anything you can do to keep the thermals in check, and then you're going to get the most out of that laptop as you can. But in terms of functionality and performance, I mean, you can run, a reasonably complex show on a laptop, and that can work. And I know there are a lot of people that do that. But the thermal issue is something you have to keep in mind for everything you do. So let's see. So we have Hakeramin. Hopefully, I'm saying your name correctly. Uh, a not so related question: what access option is there available if we want to keep a vMix server room? Sort of isolated in a server room. Actually, one thing that I would recommend is you can use NDI screen capture, and that has a KVM mode in it. So you could connect to that vMix via sort of a KVM, and that would allow you to operate that vMix system as if it were a local system. Uh, the advantage to that is that could work over something like NDI Bridge. So if you need to get in and do something on that vMix system from a remote location, you could do that. So that's one approach to working with a remote vMix system. The other approach could be to use something like Parsec or TeamViewer. That would give you, again, another way to remote into that box. A third model is using something called RDP, which is sort of a remote desktop protocol to connect. RDP can just do some funky things. RDP plays with the native Windows audio settings and can disconnect things on you sometimes. So it would be my last choice, just unless you were really sure you could do it. But it is free and sort of baked into Windows, so it is something that could work. Things with Parsec, things that they can also work remotely, but there are some costs to that, TeamViewer, Parsec. But there are some costs there. RDP is more of it's remote but on a local network kind of thing to connect to it. So those would be the three ways I could think of sort of to access that vMix system and run it as if it were local. The other thing, which is sort of flipping this in another direction, is that's one of the big advantages of something like AWS, where you can spin up a vMix instance in AWS, have the instance I think they can bake in instances with Parsec in it, so you could just remote control that. And the latency with AWS is phenomenally small, a few milliseconds. So it is almost as if you were just on a box on your local network. So that could be another way. And the advantage there is you can run a whole production. You could run LiveToAir up there in AWS. You can run vMix in AWS. You can run other types of things, bring cameras in via SRT or NDI Bridge up into AWS. So a lot of different ways to work with that as well. So just another model to consider in doing this. So hopefully that covered your question there. So so Joe Max is saying never ever RDP. I mean, I am not a big fan of RDP. It's ubiquitous, but the problems with it are sort of ubiquitous too. And I think even in the RDP into vMix, like AWS says, don't do it. And we've had people where the performance goes down. There's a lot of issues with RDP. So I probably shouldn't have raised it as something, but it is on the list. But I agree with Joe. Never use RDP if you can avoid it for any of these things. So Joe was saying it uses its own stupid virtual graphics drive, and what Joe says. I mean, it's probably a very good way to put it. So I wouldn't do anything with RDP for production. I really would stick to Parsec or NDI screen capture with NDI with NDI Studio Monitor to do a remote KVM, so something like that. So JP is asking a not so related question for those in the chat. How do you tag participants in chat when watching on YouTube, on iPhone, not managing to tag you guys? So when you say you want to tag participants, JP, you're saying you want to target a comment. I believe you just put the @ and the person's name, and that will sort of flag it for them that it's the comment is directed at them. I think that's how most people are doing that. In the comments that we see here, that's usually people put an @ before the person's name or handle. And I think that will flag them as being mentioned in a comment. All right. So I think we are probably at the point to wrap this up. So, so yeah. So JP's saying he loves that the what Joe says. That absolutely. I mean, if I'm in a room with Joe, I will I'll definitely defer to him on pretty much anything. He's he's an incredibly smart guy when it comes to these things. So I can certainly remain humble and learn. That's one of the things I love about this. I get to learn from so many smart people. So anyway, I guess we're gonna call this a wrap for today. Thank you everybody for being part of the show. I'll tell you the post-show hangouts are as much fun for me as the shows themselves. So I appreciate everybody being part of this. So we will, in all likelihood, I may be on the road next week. I am not sure, but if I'm not, we will have a show again next week. And hopefully this could be something interesting. There's a new product release out from BirdDog, a new software product that I've been talking to them about, and would love to dive into that. So hopefully, if we have a show next week, we'll be covering that. So thank you everyone for joining, and I'll see you all. Take care. Bye.